If you're watching this video, you've more likely than not seen this image. I love it, sincerely too. Yeah, it's embarrassing and goofy, but I think both of those things stem from how just painfully genuine it is. It's someone taking something they love and wanting to see themselves, others they care about, or some amalgamation of the two in the media they enjoy, even if that media is inspired by real events and people. Yes, maybe taking a white slave owner and using him as an outlet for affirmed queerness and diversity instead of looking to actually queer or diverse media is a little misguided. Contrarily, maybe making a white slave owner a template for the kind of person who would give him an aneurysm by just existing is the exact kick in the teeth the old guy deserves. I don't really feel that way myself. I'm definitely more in the camp that this kind of thing is a misplaced form of attachment, seeing something you like and bending it into something so different it stops being recognizable. To be clear, I don't love this in spite of it being misguided. I love it because it is misguided. Something like Miku Binder Thomas Jefferson can really only come from a place of passion and exploration. In the same way that seeing someone Sparkle Cat or Mary Sue OC is dorky and charming, I think that same feeling applies here. Miku Binder Thomas Jefferson gave someone an outlet to throw as many subversive or countercultural identities at a wall to see what sticks. It's a safe and controlled way to experiment with queerness. Yeah, it might be messy and imperfect, but that messy imperfection might just be what someone needs at that point in their life. Manga and anime in 2009 was a completely different beast than we have today. Going to your local bookstore, you'd find maybe a comic book case with hopefully one, potentially two shelves of said case holding those other comics. The ones that are more bound like a traditional book and are from Japan. All of those sporting one of three logos on the spine: Shonen Jump, Shoujo Beat, and Tokyo Pop. Tokyo Pop is an interesting figure in that lineup, mainly for their lack of presence today. In their heyday, they were the DC to Jump and Beat's Marvel, but it's a heyday that I don't even feel like I fully participated in. The reason I look back at 2009 specifically is that time for me was defined by monthly Shonen Jump. I didn't have too many friends that were into manga, so it was hard for me to find new things to read, and a subscription to Jump was fairly inexpensive. It got me a lot of mileage reading-wise, so while I didn't collect a lot of old volumes of manga with Tokyo Pop logos, I have almost every issue of Shonen Jump from the last 4 years of the magazine's publication. I could try to make the argument that Tokyo Pop not having a magazine contributed to their fall from grace. That would be wrong and silly, but I do think the Tokyo Pop magazine was an indicator of the broader weirdness with what manga importing used to be like. Okay, so Tokyo Pop didn't have a magazine in 2009, but in 1999 they had two. Smile, a teen girl's lifestyle magazine with some manga chapters, and MixxZine. I'd like to look at MixxZine specifically because it's a prime example of how manga would be marketed in the US for the next decade. The titles that MixxZine launched with and spent a majority of its time publishing were Ice Blade, a seinen cop thriller, Parasite, yes, like that Parasite, which I forget is that old, and Magic Knight Rayearth and Sailor Moon, which sounds like a great lineup for me. This is literally my to-read pile on my desk right now, but also this lineup is odd. Allegedly, they were trying to hit two different markets and hope that one would stick around for the others, but in doing so, I think they made something for no one in trying to make a magazine for everyone, which I know is not 100% true. Like, I know I'm not alone in enjoying a broad spectrum of manga, but like, Sailor Moon had been out in the US for like 2 years. Yes, there were adults who were into it, but also a lot of very young girls. Trying to get the 1997 Sailor Moon crowd to read something like this and expect them to roll with it is a choice. The magazine only lasted 3 years. I would say it's clear why it didn't work from the first issue, but that's unfair. I can say that with hindsight. Not just hindsight, but as an adult who has clear delineations of manga and anime as something with genres and demographics, not just looking at it as a whole entity. Because yes, at this point in time, manga and anime fans in the United States were hungry. But just because fans are hungry, that doesn't mean they aren't discerning. If I say jump or beat in relation to manga, you will probably think of a muscular teenage boy that glows or a really lanky teen girl covered in screen tone effects, respectively. While they were more limited in their output, Shonen Jump and Shoujo Beat were reliable. When you saw these logos, you knew that they were going to do what they said on the tin. Now, I can't blame this lack of a cohesive identity on Tokyopop's decline as a whole. The fact that Tokyopop is a company based in the US made them more likely to feel the woes of American economic crises, but I think it's fair to say it was a contributing factor to MixxZine's decline. The magazine is built on a clashing mix of the foreign and the familiar, showing an audience Sailor Moon and Magic Knight Rayearth and expecting them to stick around for Parasite and Ice Blade, or vice versa. That, to me, is what American manga distribution was for the 2000s. The assumption that novelty was the main point of interest without the actual subject matter of what was being sold given the weight it's worth. So with all of that established, let's talk about Stan Lee's weird shonen manga. Which actually brings us back to 2009 and back to Shonen Jump magazine. Like I said earlier, these magazines were foundational to how I interacted with manga, so don't be surprised if there are a few videos on this channel that open with me tossing an issue of it on the ground. This issue gives us such a cocktail of manga chapters. Not to say that the manga themselves are an odd mix, but the points that they're at in their respective stories is all over the place. Which, quick aside, have you noticed when people just kind of use 90s anime as a blanket term for any anime made before the 2000s? I don't think it's just people being unfamiliar with different anime through the years, and more so how anime was distributed. People growing up outside Japan would have had 90s anime broadcast alongside 80s and 70s with no clear delineation. If they didn't become avid fans, they wouldn't care to differentiate the actual decades of anime. I'm not trying to pass judgment or make a call out, it's just something I find interesting. It's in this July 2009 issue of Shonen Jump we open on a Sage Mode Naruto in the middle of his fight with Pain. The Bleach crew are fresh into Hueco Mundo, and the Straw Hats are almost to the end of Alabasta. Oh, cool, I can get official Bleach merch in there.com. But on the cover, we are greeted with this. Karakuri Doji, Ultimo, the new manga, an exciting collaboration from Shonen Jump and Stan Lee, which instantly caught my attention as a youth. A titan of the American comic industry going over to work with the creator of Shaman King on something new and wholly unique. I was going to say wholly unique for its time, but that would imply that we're ever going to see someone as big in comics as Stan Lee again. Often when I think of Stan Lee's writing, I think of fairly simple setups. Not in a bad way, but you know, a man that's a spider, or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but green. But Ultimo feels almost gargantuan out the gate. The series follows Yamato, Ultimo, and his friends, both in the current day and friends from a past life as they navigate the battles of the Doji. We have Yamato's best friend Rune, who's basically a lanky Manta from Shaman King, and Sayama, his crush, and honestly a bunch of others. There are like 15 different robot kids, all of them have some person with them. They all personify different qualities, positive and negative. Ultimo is the embodiment of good. Jealous is the embodiment of envy. I know, creative naming, but part of that is the human masters of the doji that also guide them on what that quality means. All of the main human players have been reincarnated, originally being born in the 12th century. Contrarily, the Karakuri Doji and the guy who made them, Dun Stan, which yes is just manga Stan Lee, are from the 30th century, and time travel around to see which force is stronger, good or evil. Also, in the future, the world has been split into two supercontinents, one on the northern hemisphere that's a utopia, and the other on the south, which is basically the Stone Age. That last bit wasn't super relevant, I just keep thinking about it, which is strange. So much of the build-up to Ultimo was different media journalists asking how simple the setup was on its face, which it is, I obviously went for a more detailed explanation, but if you bring it down to brass tacks, it's just ultimate good versus ultimate evil. But even from the jump, Hiroyuki Taki talks about wanting that premise to start as a clear black and white that would eventually blur to shades of gray, which kind of works. As the series goes on and more doji get introduced, while they still operate on the lines of good and evil, certain characters make decisions that don't seem to line up with what you'd expect. It's surprisingly ambitious, in all honesty. Not surprising because of the people involved, but just surprising, period. The series was written with double-length chapters, so obviously there's more going on per chapter compared to your weekly manga. I had odd feelings about the pacing, but that might just be me reading the series as a complete work and not having to wait for chapters in real time. What would have taken a fan in 2009 7 months, I get to read in an afternoon. While I'm reading the same amount of pages, I'm not spending as much time with the characters. Being a fan on release means you get to ruminate on its characters, draw fan art, or go to online forums to see other people do the same in between chapters. There is definitely a notebook in my parents' house that has my doji OCs, but also consider when I said it sheds the basic black and white nature of the story eventually, it starts to blur pretty quick. And in general, I think the series moves at a breakneck pace. Like 12 chapters in, we have every core good and bad doji established, a heel turn, and the chapter ends in a complete timeline reset because a majority of the cast gets killed, which is a very bold move. If I were doing a more proper review, I'd get more into how I think this whole reset thing feels a little tedious. But as I'm thinking about it, it's a big cliffhanger that did get me to keep reading. So part of the reason I wanted to talk about Ultimo is I wanted to see if there was any funny press stuff with Stan Lee in Japan. But unfortunately, all I ended up with was dead links, a handful of interviews, some through the Wayback Machine, and an episode of a variety show that I can't seem to find anywhere. Thankfully, what I could find directly shed a little light on how the series came to be and its production, but also inadvertently made it clear what this series was made for. Tsukiyomi Jump Bang was a variety show that aired from 2009 to 2014. It featured a panel of hosts. Each episode would put a different manga in the center of discussion. It's basically just a 30-minute ad for that week's edition of Jump magazines. Shows like this are so interesting to me, with official YouTube channels or post shows being more of a thing now. Oh god, Chris Hardwick jump scare. Jump Bang doesn't feel out of place, except for the fact that this aired on TV, while this kind of show has been largely left to online spaces in the US. The upside of these shows being online over here is they're easy to find, as I am desperate to watch the July 3rd, 2009 episode of Tsukiyomi Jump Bang. This episode was focused on Ultimo. Obviously, this wouldn't be the most sincere discussion around the series, as it's the host's job to sell the magazine, but I'm just looking for any marketing material on the Japanese side of things. The only Ultimo remnants of the show I can find are the 2-chapter Vomic voice comic V-Omic they released, and thankfully it's pretty easy to find online. I'll link a playlist I set up for them below. The Vomics were a segment of Jump Bang where they get voice actors to play out a chapter or two from the manga. The Ultimo Vomic was released in 2011. I actually ended up finding a production blog for the studio that worked on the Vomics. It's very cute. Ultimo as a series was made in 2 parts. Stan Lee coming up with a loose outline for the series, while Hiroyuki Taki fleshed it out while putting his own spin on it. The dynamic of Takei and Stan feels akin to a producer and his director. This series was published in Jump Square and serialized monthly, not weekly. The chapters would then be sent back to Stan to be translated, and he would retool the dialogue. Takei and Stan worked together entirely remote, planning over video calls. As far as I can tell, the first time the two ever met face-to-face was during Comic-Con, which makes the series fascinating. It's simultaneously an import and an export. Hell, depending on what version you read, it will greatly change Stan Lee's involvement. Ultimo's Japanese and English versions are like Exorcist 3 versus Legion. I do wonder how long Stan stayed directly involved in Ultimo. Not to put doubt on his involvement, Reading interviews, he's very open about his hands-off approach to this collaboration, but it's still being a collaboration. The only reason I'd ask questions at all is, to be blunt, Stanley was fucking old when the series started, 87 to be precise, and it ran for 5 years. I'm not saying it's impossible he worked on Ultimo for its entire run, but I don't see this series being that big of a priority, especially when looking at its coverage. Almost all of the talk for the series is from its release, which I do think is important, because when I say there is little to no talk about Ultimo, I mean it. Looking at the only forum discussion thread I could find, the series was never super active to begin with, but eventually just falls off a cliff, with comments on those threads averaging at 0 after like chapter 11. The audience was just not there for Ultimo, which I may have some suspicions on. So when I said Ultimo was equally an import and an export, there's a little more to that. If you'll allow me to put my reasonable tinfoil hat on for a moment, I genuinely think the main driving force behind Ultimo being a thing at all was to sell Shonen Jump in the US. The marketing for Ultimo was pushing hard on the East meets West nature of this collaboration, something foreign and familiar. Like I said before, a majority of the marketing was based in the United States. They're not telling people to look out for collected volumes, it's all about the monthly magazine. The only review I could find from the time even talks about how much more bang for your buck you get by buying Shonen Jump for $4.99 versus an American comic at a similar price. The series was almost instantly elevated to a headliner, with it getting 3 covers during its run. Keep in mind that this is happening during the late 2000s. We are at the peak of the Big 3. If a series wasn't Bleach, One Piece, or Naruto, it wouldn't get more than 1 cover in the magazine, except for Ultimo. Compare that to its Japanese counterpart Jump Square, where the series only got 1 cover for its debut. Which, even looking at Jump Square, it's a monthly magazine, not the regular for a big flagship series like this in Japan, unlike over here where monthly comics are the norm. In an interview with Hiroyuki Taki, he said that the Japanese audiences wouldn't be as drawn to the series by Stanley's name alone, which again leads me to feel that the series was made to be an export. Sorry if I'm making this sound more nefarious than it actually is, I just find it really fascinating. Ultimo was nearly lab tested to try and be a hit, but despite everyone's best effort, it didn't click. It seems in trying to make a manga that could appeal to American comic fans, they made a series that didn't interest anyone, except those already reading manga. They were hoping an audience wanting Spider-Man would stick around for Tagami Bachi. But what was it? Was it not Japanese enough to tempt the weebs? Not cape shit enough to grab the Marvel fans? I honestly don't think there's really any one singular quality about Ultimo that would contribute to it not clicking, or why this video might be the first time you're hearing about it. But I also think promising people a shonen series made by Stan the Man and getting this probably would have made a lot of nerds in the late 2000s bow out. So let's talk about the pink elephant in the room, because Ultimo is like really gay. Like really, really, really gay. Hello everyone, we're almost to the end of the video, which I want to say thank you for making it this far. If you don't mind sharing with people if you like it, or leaving a comment, it's, if you'd like, totally up to you though. I also have a Patreon if you feel like contributing to me financially, but again, totally okay if not. I'm hoping to have my first Patreon exclusive video out soon. It'll be something nice and easy, mainly more me like loosely talking about a canceled project, and not super intensive on the video editing side. With that being said, I'm still also working on my next video, the 2024 manga that got canceled from Shonen Jump, that would be. Follow up to the 2023 one. Both of those, both that and this one just took a little longer than I wanted. I originally wanted this out in June for reasons I'm about to get into, but honestly it coming out in July makes a little more sense since Ultimo originally started in the USA in July. So again, thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope you like where it goes. Surprise! This video actually had 3 false starts, and this is the real video. So you know how Kishimoto is really bad at writing women, which leads Naruto to being built on men with really intense emotional relationships? That's what's going on here. Also, when I say gay, I more so mean it as a shorthand for multiple facets of queerness, because Ultimo's queerness has quite a bit more about different forms of gender, which, like Naruto, I think is accidental. So, for example, have you actually looked at the doji? They are all boys, and while some have more traditionally masculine traits, a good handful of them look androgynous to straight up feminine. I don't know if the call for all of the doji to be boys came from Stan Lee, Takei, or an editor, but it feels like Takei ran out of dude designs and just started sprinkling some women in there. Take Service, for example. If you're familiar with Takei's other work, you probably spotted that Service is just straight up Tamao from Shaman King, but in a different outfit. I kind of even forgot that Service is supposed to be a guy at points. Like this scene here, which isn't something I want to be happening to women in shonen, but if I showed you this image in isolation, you would assume from the general treatment of Service to the framing of Avaro's arm here that Service would be a woman, but nah, he's just a dude in a boxy spaghetti strap crop top. While Service and the other doji's expression of gender is never meaningfully discussed, it's also never questioned. They look the way they do, and at no point are they ever mistaken for anything other than what they are, boys. I would extend that same loose expression of gender to the titular character himself, because Ultimo is like androgyny perfected. His outward appearance is a cocktail of feminine and masculine. Looking at Takei's art, Ultimo is made up of a lot more soft shapes than his typical guys. Not just that, but I always felt that the way his top hangs, reads his boobs. I understand how his shirt is hanging and how that wouldn't really fit anatomically. Maybe I'm just stupid, but I think there's a lot there that would lead people to interpreting Ultimo as feminine. Now, while we're on Ultimo, this seems about as good a time as any to bring up the part of the story where Yamato and Ultimo have sex. Okay, not literally. What I'm talking about here is the pledge ritual. It's something that Ultimo and Yamato do to get their first shonen power-up. It gives Ultimo a new big robot form, but also brings back all of Yamato's memories from his past life in the 12th century. But it's quite literally enacted by Yamato, placing himself inside of Ultimo. Not even in a subtle way, like he's piloting a mech. That happens later. This is quite clearly analogous to a sex act. While it does put a bit of a hamper on my idea that the more queer elements are accidental, this one is clearly not. I also don't know what Takei was going for here. I mean that on a few fronts. Who is he trying to appeal to? This shit feels like Fujo bait. I don't know if the American comic reading fandom has a substantial enough sect of American Fujoshi to keep this series afloat, or if this was trying to up readership in Japan, or if this is just a dynamic that Hiroyuki Taki just wanted to explore. But it's very obvious and peculiar because this is a moment that cannot be removed from the story. This scene of this non-binary twink being penetrated is presented like the psycho toilet. It being there is instrumental to the events of Ultimo. This is also something that is not unique to Ultimo and Yamato. It is quite literally something that all of the doji and their master have to do if they want to become stronger, which, oh god, no, please, no. But that unfortunate example of how this series' power system works aside, Ultimo and Yamato always have this kind of close, intimate relationship. And while it's never put to the same level as Yamato's feelings for Sayama, Ultimo and Yamato have this closeness that feels like more than just your average friend. More than Yamato's best friend, Rune even, which, oh golly, let's talk about Rune. So for my discussion around Rune, I'm going to refer to the character by she, her, despite the story using he, him, and that's because this character is trans. The story never refers to her as such, and outside of one group shot later in the series, it never really broaches the idea of her being trans explicitly. She's a very messy and not ideal representation of transness, but in that, I think it makes her a really interesting character. It was her character that made me want to revisit this series for a video. Outside of the doji, Rune is what I remember the most about Ultimo. Also, to be clear, I myself am not trans, so there's a chance that what I'm seeing in this character is completely off the mark, but let's talk about it. Rune starts the series as Yamato's closest friend. She spends the opening chapters as just a supporting player, there for Yamato when he needs it, even reminding Yamato about Sayama's birthday, because even though Yamato has had a crush on her for as long as him and Rune have been friends, he can't seem to remember that kind of stuff. Luckily, Rune is just that good a friend, until the evil doji Jealous forces Rune into a pledge ritual, making Rune Jealous's master, and most importantly, unlocking her memories. Memories of her and Yamato together in the 12th century when Yamato was a legendary bandit and Rune was Lady Gecko, a noblewoman who escaped the mundanity and rigidness of noble life, a life in which she would just be married off to whoever, trading this for a life on the road with Yamato. This wasn't just a temporary escape for her either, she was there for Yamato, with the two of them actually getting into a romantic relationship, a relationship cut short when Lady Gecko is killed one night. I want to break that down a little. I want to talk more about why I think this plays into Rune as a trans character by starting with Darumata. He is a grown-ass adult, a cop in his 40s, when he is reawakened as someone from Yamato's old bandit crew. He still listens to and protects Yamato like they're back in the 12th century, despite Yamato being a 17-year-old kid. This isn't a dynamic unique to Darumata either. Whenever Yamato in the modern day meets someone from his past, he backslides a little. He uses whatever happened in the 12th century as a basis for their relationship now, even if that doesn't make sense by modern standards, except with Rune. Rune, who is just as much the same person as everyone else Yamato knew back in the 12th century, is never taken seriously as someone who Yamato could take on as his romantic partner, despite that literally being their past relationship, because Yamato can't look past his perception of Rune as a man now. Which I think this reading is further supported when we look to that group shot I mentioned earlier, where Rune is presenting as a woman. This is a point in the story where everyone is doing some time travel stuff, but I think it's telling that when given the option to present however you like, start anew, Rune is presenting feminine. To be clear, this isn't a different past incarnation of Rune. This is the same Rune in the modern era, a little older in fact, who's gone back to the past, and this is how she's dressed. So why do I say this is inadvertent when this is starting to feel fairly intentional? Well, I'm personally interpreting this, and by extension, explaining it in a much more sympathetic light than the story actually does. To be clear, I think in the story, how it is currently presented, Yamato still sucks. But Rune as a character is built on pretty common and shitty the evil gay tropes, because that part is intentional. The part I haven't mentioned and genuinely forgot about until I reread Ultimo was the scene where Rune nearly assaults Yamato, having Jealous tie him down to a bed and climbing on top of him. When I said Rune is a poor, messy example of queerness, I wasn't mincing my words, but I also think by making a messy character, Takei is tapping into some real stuff, like this scene for example. After Jealous and Rune are pledged, he tells her, even though you were reborn a man, you should have no shame in how you feel about him. And that's raw as fuck. So, unfortunately, I don't know Japanese, but knowing Stan Lee editorialized the official English release, and this version of the line is from a fan translation, I'm more willing to say this version is closer to the original, especially considering this is the line in Stan Lee's version. It's just vague and odd. I'm not trying to make any claims about how Stan Lee felt about the gays, but you have to admit this line feels like it's saying nothing. Because yes, there is a lot negative to be said about Rune's place in queerness. queerness that I am not a part of. But there is also something to be said about petty catharsis. Because you know what? Maybe if you did have the ability to climb inside a giant spider and beat the shit out of people who refuse to accept you as you are based on their perceptions, kind of deserve it. Maybe Rune wouldn't become the embodiment of jealousy if she was just taken seriously by Yamato for like 2 seconds. I do find it funny that Rune doesn't actually realize that her feelings for Yamato are romantic until she's awakened by the pledge, only because I'm just like imagining her listening to Untouched by the Veronicas on loop and being like, shit, this is just what being a man is, huh? While obviously we should strive for good stories and representation in all forms, I also think having a character who can just be an outlet for frustration is valuable. She wasn't born jealous. She's jealous because of how everyone around her doesn't listen. I think a character like Rune can ask questions about who the villain even is, a person committing subversive acts, or the society that would view that person as subversive for just existing regardless of what they're doing. Ultimo is weird. It's kind of bad and also really busy, but also a fascinating case study of what manga was right before it became what it is now. Maybe it's just the circles I run in, but I feel like these days you're far more likely to meet someone who's more into anime and by extension manga as a loose disambiguation than someone into American comics under a similar vague umbrella. I can't say that Ultimo is one of a kind, as Stanley worked on other Japanese projects like Hero Man, but it's certainly in a unique family, a mostly forgotten attempt in trying to make manga for Americans, but without considering what Americans they were trying to appeal to, something left to the annals of internet dwellers to try and bring up and show and tell to others. It could be possible if Ultimo came out earlier, when manga fans were still more hungry than discerning, that the series may have been more fondly remembered. But I'm a little torn on that idea. Would Stan Lee fans be put off by the idiosyncrasies of manga? Would manga fans want a Marvel Comics for Kids dub of a new ambitious shonen? Also, how much of both would get no homoed by this series? Short of asking the editors behind the scenes at Jump, I'll never be able to tell you why Ultimo didn't catch on for sure. I'll tell you as someone who was fairly active in my local-ish con scene around this time, Ultimo had no fan presence at these events. Maybe it just never found its audience. Maybe it didn't exist at the time, but now it can begin to be looked at more positively, as the rough edges of the passé become the texture of antiquity. Or maybe it'll just be looked at as that weird manga that Stan Lee wrote, where a teenager gets uninvited from his crush's birthday because she finds him in his underwear pinning a young-looking boy down, about to kiss him in his bed. Who knows? I'll let you decide.